would like to give a review and comments on the interviews by the diet doctor Andreas. I would like to start my review with Dr. Stephen Feeney. Reason being because he was my first introduction to low carbohydrate diet in regards to some YouTube videos that I saw of him, and also I had the pleasure of reading his book, Low Carbohydrate Living. Dr. Feeney starts his interview on low carbohydrate diets and adaptation to a low carb diet. He talks about behavioral adaptation and a physiological adaptation to the diet. He talks about it taking about 2 to 6 weeks to get to a state of what he termed nutritional ketosis, also known as keto adaptation. And what we're working here with is to change your fuel source, making the body fat more accessible, and so therefore easy access to your fat storage through a low carbohydrate diet. And according to Dr. Feeney's research, the preferred fats we're talking about are the saturated and the monosaturated fats. And what I found fascinating was the more saturated fats and monosaturated fats that you consume in your diet, the less omega-3 you need. That gets a wow! The purpose of eating a low-carb, high-fat diet is to keep the brain and body in a constant fuel source, preventing the highs and lows of carbohydrates. In the beginning of the interview, Dr. Feeney was asked about the importance of sticking to the diet. He expressed the importance of commitment. You must commit yourself to it for long term. Reintroducing carbohydrates just sets you back again to the state of keto adaptation. Now, there has been times that low carbohydrate diets are thought of or confused with a high protein diet. That is simply not the case when it comes to low carbohydrate diet. High protein diets bring with them an array of symptoms: gastrointestinal issues, fatigue, nausea, and also high amounts of protein can block fat storage release. The low carbohydrate diet is not to exclude carbohydrates. It's a consumption of the right carbohydrates. Dr. Feeney explains how, as a snack, he will have some berries with some heavy cream. It's the overconsumption of carbohydrates where we have the issue. It seems through his interview that Dr. Feeney has enjoyed what I call cultural anthropological approach to his research. His insight on the Inuits and their diet has set him into investigating their eating habits by mimicking his diet accordingly. Through the doctor's research, he came up with the percentage of 75 to 85% fat, 15% protein, and 5% carbohydrates, according to the Inuits' diet. They would hunt late summer, early fall, the caribou. By then, the caribou overengorged itself and therefore had a lot more fat. Given the choice between the caribou fat, which is a saturated fat, and the seal fat, which is polysaturated fats, the Inuits preferred the caribou fat. The polysaturated fats from the seals they'd use to light their oil lamps. What I found very interesting in this interview was when Dr. Feeney brought up the early European explorers of the Arctic region. When these explorers brought their own resource, their own supplies, when it came to food consumption, months down the road they would develop scurvy. Those that relied on the Inuits' diet of high fat were free of scurvy. We know today that vitamin C is required in higher amounts due to our increased amount of carbohydrate intake, due to carbohydrates increasing levels of oxidative stress. Dr. Feeney brings up that low carbohydrate diets are nothing new. There was a Bellevue Hospital research in 1928 by a gentleman named Stephenson, and he wrote a book called Not by Bread Alone, and he talks about how he called them the Eskimos at that time, how he lived with them for a decade starting at 1906, and he strictly ate caribou and seal fat and meat. Dr. Feeney in his interview also brings up the diet of the Native Americans and of the First Nations, as they're called in Canada. In their relationship to the buffalo, they would also hunt the buffalo during a particular time of the year when they were most fattest. And after the hunt, they would separate the lean meat from the buffalo's fat, and they would take the meat and they would pound it and dry it. And after it was dried, they'd have these buffalo sacks that they created, and they would put the meat inside the buffalo bag and then pour the saturated fat from the buffalo, the warm saturated fat, over the lean meat. Of course, Dr. Feeney gets a lot more detailed in his co-authored books, Low Carbohydrate Living and Low Carbohydrate Performance. Now, it wasn't spoken about here, but there is an importance to vegetables in your low carbohydrate diet. They add incredible minerals and fiber to your diet. Where I differ here with Dr. Feeney is I do not consume any nightshade vegetables. Go ahead and do your research on nightshade vegetables and come up with your own decision on them. And also nuts are very welcomed in the diet. I personally exclude peanuts due to them also being nightshades. I also oppose artificial sweeteners. My conclusion to Dr. Feeney's research and the low carbohydrate diet? Obviously, you can see the transition here. I find it to be an incredible long-term nutritional eating habit. And for those of us who have a fear of fats due to our conditioning, my HDL levels and LDL levels are better than ever. In my low carbohydrate diet review part 2, I will be giving comments and my reviews on Dr. Mary Vernon.